It's perfectly normal for a language to have silent letters. But with English, it's just got way out of hand, without doubt. It's been said that every single letter of the alphabet can be silent in English. So let's put that to the test and find out how our language ended up this way. Welcome to another Rob Words. English does have an extraordinary number of words with silent letters. I mean, just look at them. But for each of them, there is an explanation. Some of these explanations are historically fascinating. Some of them offer extraordinary insights into the ways in which we speak. And some of them are just really irritating. I think you're going to agree. So let's see if indeed every letter of the alphabet can be silent in English, because I must admit I'm a little bit skeptical. Just keep an eye on this up here as we tick them off, and we'll see if by the end there are any letters left. So where to start? Well, I reckon the default assumption when we see a silent letter in a word is that at some point that letter must have been pronounced. At one time people were saying receipt and debt. Of course they were. We just got lazy over time and stopped pronouncing them. So what if I were to tell you that the P in receipt and B in debt were never pronounced? Because they weren't. This is how the word debt was spelled when we borrowed it from French around 700 years ago. In fact, it's still spelled like that in French. And look, no B. Now see how its spelling varied over the centuries afterwards. Still no B through the 1300s, all throughout the 1400s and the 1500s until, whoop, what's this? Where did that come from? Suddenly, in the middle of the 1500s, a B appears. What? Why? Well, something else is happening at precisely this time. The Renaissance. The Renaissance in England sees scholars and the like taking a sudden interest in ancient Greece and Rome. It's called the Renaissance because it's a rebirth of classical culture. One of the forms this takes for writers is an interest in the Greek and particularly Latin origins of English words. Some of these writers noticed, for example, that the word debt most likely came from the Latin debitum, meaning owed. And so, in a nod to debt's classical roots, and to show off that they were aware of them, they started to spell debt with a B. A pointless, self-congratulatory move that users of English like you and me are still having to deal with. But it gets worse. The Renaissance scholars did almost exactly the same thing with the word doubt, and they introduced that pretentious P into receipt. They wanted never to be pronounced B in plumber, a mute C in indict, a ludicrous L in salmon, and a stupidly silent S in aisle. All additional letters that hadn't been present in these words as long as they'd been in English. That last one, aisle, had the knock-on effect of also introducing an S into another word, island, because writers understandably thought the words were related, which funnily enough they are not. One of them is Germanic and the other one is Romance. And bonus balls up, this is also responsible for the S in the other kind of isle, added to reflect aisle too. Also amazing is the fact that we've started to pronounce some of the letters added during this silent revolution. The word perfect didn't have a C in it before the Renaissance, and there was no L in fault either, but those fancy Renaissance scholars shoehorned them in, and now we're sounding them out. So that is one of the more irritating episodes in the story of silent letters in English. It's annoying because they don't need to be there, but it is not the only instance of deliberate insertion of inessential letters. Another had occurred slightly earlier actually, when the first printing presses arrived in England. I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. The fellow who opened the first presses in England, William Caxton, had to hire folk from continental Europe to help him with the things because the Europeans were the only ones with the expertise. Unfortunately, the foreign printers that came over to Britain had their own ideas about how English should, could, and would be spelled. For example, they thought that could should have an L in it to match with the L's in should and would, despite can being distinctly L-less. So, in some early printed books, could appeared with an L, and it stuck. They also thought thumb, crumb and limb should have silent B's at the end of them, like comb, lamb and womb already did. So now they do. And consistent in their obsession with consistency, they added a W to one of the meanings of whole to match it up with who, what and why. Although, actually that one's kind of useful, isn't it? Oh, and they threw a spectral H into ghost because they had one in Flemish. So again, we have a load of words with letters in them that have never been pronounced. And they just sit there, a silent threat to anyone attempting to master English spelling. But do you know where else there are silent threats? The internet. But luckily, NordVPN, who've sponsored this video, are here to keep you safe. NordVPN enables you to change your online location so you can surf the net comfortably reassured that you're not being tracked. This is particularly helpful too if, like me, you're often using unsecured public Wi-Fi, like in a cafe or wherever. But of course, the extra big bonus of websites thinking you're visiting from somewhere else is that they'll allow you to access things that aren't normally available in your actual location. This includes being able to watch streaming content that's geo-blocked where you are. But NordVPN, despite the name, is much more than just a VPN. It's a complete online security package. Its brilliant Threat Protection Pro feature will scan any files you download for malware, direct you away from websites known for scamming people, and block irritating or harmful pop-ups. I have NordVPN switched on all the time, and I can protect my whole family with it by having it on up to 10 devices. If you want to do the same, use my special link nordvpn.com/robwordsvpn, I'll put it in the description, and you'll get an exclusive deal with 4 extra months for free. There is a 30-day money-back guarantee too, so it really is risk-free as well. Go to nordvpn.com/robwordsvpn and give it a go. Now, a lot of the time, that instinctive assumption that a silent letter in a word was at some point in times gone by sounded out is correct. Knock, knock. Who's there? Silent K in all of these words. Silent now, but not in the past. It's thought we stopped pronouncing the K gradually over the centuries, funnily enough around the time when Renaissance scholars were adding in those other silent letters. But before that, for example in Geoffrey Chaucer's day, the K was being proudly enunciated. His Knight's Tale would have been introduced with "A knicht there was, and that a worthy man." But if you go back further still to Old English, being spoken over 1,000 years ago, all of these words appear, although not with a K, but with a C. A C that was sounded out. The C wouldn't have been there if it wasn't, because these arrangements of Latin lettering were supposed to represent Anglo-Saxon speech. An Anglo-Saxon called a knife a kniff, a knot a knotter, and his knee his kneel. In Dutch and German, English's sister languages, a knee is still a knie to this day. And you can copy and paste everything I just said about silent K words over to these silent G words too. We once had gnawing gnats and gnomes. Now, one word you could use to explain the loss of these K and G sounds is laziness. The transitions to the ends were kind of awkward, so we stopped doing them. But another more technical word to explain it is phonotactics. Phonotactics dictate which sounds are allowed to appear together in any given language. For example, in English, we can begin a word with a sp sound, combining an S and a P, but we can't begin it with a p sound, combining an H and a P. However, phonotactics, these rules about the sounds of a language, can change over time, and that's what's happened with English. Kn and gn sounds were once on the right side of the law, welcome at the start of English words. But now, the law's changed, and they're not. Phonotactics are responsible for many more silent letters in English, especially in words that we have imported from other languages. Different languages have different rules, and when a borrowed word doesn't fit with our sound laws, we have to change that word to make it fit. In ancient Greek, it was perfectly legitimate to start a word with a ps sound, but in English, it ain't. So we pretend the P isn't there when we pronounce Greek-derived words like psychology and psalm. Ditto with pt words like pterodactyl. However, the rules of English only say that you can't start a word with those sounds. The pter at the start of pterodactyl, meaning wing, is the same as the pter at the end of helicopter, meaning wing. But because the pt is in the middle of that word, we can pronounce it. Helicopter. The same goes with words like mnemonic. You can't kick off an English word with a mn. You just can't. So we skip the M. However, In other words, like insomnia, that mn sound is A-OK or M-OK. We have rules on how words can end too. No English term can climax with a mn either. So in the case of autumn, good timing, tree. So in the case of the word autumn, we drop that ungainly N. Yet with autumnal, both letters get their time to shine. By the way, Chaucer used to spell autumn with a P in it too, which is definitely just silly. You can't just P anywhere, Geoffrey. Autumn, of course, isn't a Greek word, by the way. It's from French, as are so many of our English words, around a third of them, in fact. Thanks, William the Conqueror. Another way you end up importing silent letters from other languages is by borrowing words that already had silent letters in them. Benign or malign, the French deigned to assign silent Gs to words like rain, and we've aligned with their design. Most of those words were descended from Latin words where the G was pronounced, although, ironically, the silent G in foreign is a homegrown invention. It was added by English writers inspired by the spelling of sovereign. We can thank the French for the fact that we can cross off some of the trickier letters from our silent letter alphabet. Borrowed terms like faux pas and choux pastry give our language its silent X's, and we can casually discard Z with a laissez-faire rendezvous chez moi. We can also thank French for words like ballet that allow us to cross off T too, although, listen, I hasten to add that listen and hasten have silent T's in too, letters dropped as a result of centuries of accumulated laziness. There's no reason not to pronounce those T's. We still say listed and hasty, but sometimes letters disappear for nothing more than convenience's sake. Take the silent D's in handkerchief and handsome, although some people might pronounce the D in the latter of those, just like they might pronounce the D in sandwich, although others definitely don't. Perhaps you saw Michael McIntyre's recent brilliant reimagining of what English would sound like if we did pronounce all our silent letters.
The sandwich shop is half an hour away. It's a waste of everybody's time.
Although weirdly, I think I sometimes pronounce it sandwich, as if there's an M in it. What's that about? Maybe you do too. Try it. Sandwich, sandwich. Actually, all this raises a good point that I should have mentioned earlier. What might be silent to one English speaker may be loud and proud to another. So far as I'm concerned, the L's in palm and folk are silent. You need them because otherwise you'd have pam and fock, but there is no L sound when I say them. Palm, folk. And that was lost in most British varieties of English centuries ago. But some people, particularly in the US, do pronounce those L's. And there are two parallel reasons for that. Some folk retained the L's because their dialect crossed the Atlantic before the Brits decided to drop those L's. And other people are pronouncing them simply because they're in the spelling, unaware that they're usually mute. They're essentially reintroducing them. Good for them. This kind of tomato-tomato difference between varieties of English also governs the overall resonance of the letter R. Some accents are overflowing with silent R's, like mine. I don't pronounce the R in over. There's no R sound, nor at the end of paper or centre, or even in my own blooming name. To me, the second R in Robert is silent. Robert. That's because my accent is what is called non-rhotic. In rhotic accents, though, like a lot of Americans have, the R's are not silent. Robert's paper coaster. You see? For people with those English accents, we have to look a lot harder for silent R's. The folk at America's Merriam-Webster Dictionary propose forecastle, part of a ship pronounced with typical nautical efficiency, or February, although I bet some people would challenge that second example. I actually had to go out of my way there not to say February, because I would say February. But people definitely do say February, so that'll do. Another letter that has the Merriam-Webster folk somewhat clutching at straws in this, by the way, excellent article is F. They put forward fifth as a word with a silent F, and I think they're probably right. Even the most precise among us who do say fifth, I think I do most of the time, still probably do find ourselves resorting to fifth when time and effort are of the essence. Merriam-Webster actually gives that as one of the legit pronunciations of the word.
Fifth.
As do the folk at Oxford, who've popped the second F in brackets to show that it is optional. But if fifth doesn't satisfy the F out of you, what about the word halfpenny, where the letter is definitely dropped, even if it's spelt like that? But F is a tricky customer, as are all of our remaining consonants above. We'll try to silence those shortly, but first observe that all of our vowels still remain too. So, can each of those be mute? Yes. Take A out of dead and you're still dead. Filter out the E's from sieve and it's still a sieve. When is I silent? I be silent when I is in business. Although, weirdly, the I in business seems to have stolen the U's job instead. Business. And business really does come from the idea of busyness, by the way. And O and U can both be accounted for in the same notorious cluster, the highly versatile word ending O-U-G-H. We ignore the O in enough, but skip the U in cough. English can be really silly. So that's all 5 of those vowels swiftly dealt with. They can all be silent in English. A big reason why a lot of vowel sounds don't resemble their spellings is of course the famous Great Vowel Shift, which saw the pronunciation of English long vowels change pretty dramatically over just a couple of 100 years, and their spellings simply didn't keep up. I did a big video about that and I will leave a link below. It's a goodie. But now we're left with the really tricky letters. Now to me it makes sense to go with Y next, it being a sort of part-time vowel. Which English words have a silent Y? Let's see what the clever folk at Merriam-Webster went with. Beyond? So their logic is that if you take the Y out, you still get be-ond. But hold on, I definitely hear a Y sound in beyond. Beyond. It's related to yonder, isn't it? Beyond. That Y might be superfluous, but it isn't silent. It's only in beyond because of the way English speakers insert Y sounds as they transition between certain vowel sounds. Beyond. It's called the intrusive Y, which sounds much spookier than it actually is. So which words really do have a silent Y? Martyr? Maybe? Martyr. There's no obvious Y sound going on in there, but you do need it because you can't just end a word with TR. We're back to phonotactics again. I think martyr's a maybe. Says, perhaps. You definitely don't pronounce the Y, not unless you're being excessively precise, saying says. But if you take it away, you get saz, not says. So another maybe there, I reckon. What about there? I like to think I pronounce it there, but I bet I and a lot of people end up pronouncing it sometimes the same as these words, hence the common confusion between the 3 of them. But is there really a word? It's more a smooshing together of 2, isn't it? At this rate, we haven't got a prayer of finding one. Hold on a second. Prayer. Prayer. And I guess some people pronounce it prayer, but I bet they're in the minority. No, I think that's it. I'm having it. Cross Y off the list. Prayer is a word with a silent Y in it. Okay, I've had a good old think and a good old Google about J already, and man, this one is tricky. Not just because there appears to be only one silent J in the English language, but because it's a word that I'm not even sure that I'm allowed to utter without incurring the wrath of the YouTube gods. Let's risk it. The word is marijuana. Now obviously in its native Spanish, that J would be making a charismatic H sound, but in English, it isn't really doing anything. Take it away and you get marijuana. It certainly isn't making its usual J sound or its occasional Y sound. So I reckon that does count. Let's chalk off J too. Now next in the queue is Q. A letter that, let's face it, we don't really need. But is it ever silent? Well, how about in racket? Take it away along with its parasitic U and you still get racket. That'll do, won't it? I know in the US racket is now spelt like that, but so far as I know you still spell the sport racquetball like that. But if that still doesn't satisfy you, I offer up the word lacquer for the same reasons mentioned above. So there we go, 25 out of 26 letters crossed off. We're close to knowing whether or not every letter in the alphabet can indeed be silent in English. It all comes down to V. Well, I have put every cell in my body into trying to find a word with a mute V, and man, it is hard. Merriam-Webster proposes ne'er as in the poetic contraction of never, but if you ever write ne'er, you do not write the V, pop an apostrophe there instead. So the V is less silent, more completely absent. Ditto with air and o'er. And I guess you could throw gimme in the mix as well for give me. But it seems that we just can't bring ourselves to write a V where there isn't one. So that's it. I think V is the one letter in English that is ne'er silent. Or at least I did think that. But then last night, while looking at whether this village in Devon is really pronounced Woolsey, it is, by the way, I had a brainwave. Surely there is a place name in England with a silent V in it. If this can be pronounced Chumley, surely the inhabitants of somewhere else are smuggling a cheeky V under the radar too. Well, they are. My enormous thanks to the people of this small village in the English county of Norfolk for pronouncing their home Ranningham. Some people definitely pronounce it Raveningham too, but look, here's that pronunciation confirmed in a 1990 BBC Pronunciation Dictionary. This is Ranningham Hall. So are we allowing that? Place names are words, and this one's in England, so doesn't that make it an English word? I'm having it. I'm doing it. I'm crossing off that V. And if one isn't enough for you, how about the town of Mulgai up in Scotland? The name has its roots in Scottish Gaelic, but we call it that in English. So that's it. Every letter can be silent somewhere in English. Fight me in the comments if you disagree. I'd also love to see your favourite outrageous examples of the overuse of silent letters. If you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and click like to let the YouTube machines know, and I think you should watch this video next. For now, I'll leave you in silence.